It is the winter of 717 AD. The greatest city in the world, Constantinople, is on its knees. Outside its massive Theodosian walls, a new and relentless power has arrived. This is the Umayyad Caliphate, an empire forged in the deserts of Arabia, which has, in less than a century, conquered everything from the borders of India to the shores of Spain. Now, it has come to deliver the killing blow to its oldest and most hated rival, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we call Byzantium. The city is surrounded. On land, a host of nearly 100,000 soldiers has dug in, a sprawling city of tents and siege engines, but the true threat lies on the water. Filling the Sea of Marmara is an armada unlike anything the world has ever seen. 1,800 ships, a forest of masts, block out the horizon. They carry siege equipment, supplies, and thousands more warriors, ready to swarm the city's vulnerable seawalls. The commander, Maslama ibn Abdul Malik, brother of the Caliph himself, is so confident of victory that he has allegedly brought his family with him, intending to settle in the city once it falls. Inside Constantinople, there is only despair. The streets are racked with famine and plague. The granaries are almost empty. The population, once 500,000, has withered. And their emperor, Leo III, is a man on a throne he barely controls. He is a brilliant general, yes, but he is a usurper, having seized power only months before. He is trapped, with no allies, no food, and no hope. The fall of Constantinople is not a question of if, but when. And when it falls, the gateway to Europe will be thrown open. The Queen of Cities will become a launching pad for the conquest of the Balkans and the Italian peninsula. The fate of Western civilization, of Christendom itself, hangs by a thread. But the Byzantines have one thing the Arabs do not. They have a secret. It is a secret whispered in terror by their enemies. A secret passed down from emperor to emperor, a formula considered so holy and so deadly that it was said to be a gift delivered by an angel. It is a weapon that defies the laws of nature, a liquid that, when sprayed from their ships, erupts into a living nightmare. It is a fire that cannot be extinguished by water, a fire that burns on water, a fire that clings to wood, to metal, and to men, consuming them in an inferno that smells of sulfur and brimstone. The Arabs have heard tales of this weapon, but they believe them to be exaggerated myths. They are about to learn the truth. As the massive Umayyad fleet moves in for the kill, a small, unassuming squadron of Byzantine dromons, low, fast galleys, sails out to meet them. They look like lambs being sent to the slaughter. But on the prow of each ship, a bronze, lion-headed projector gleams in the weak morning light. This is the story of one of the most terrifying and mysterious superweapons ever created. This is the story of the weapon that saved an empire, shaped the next 1,000 years of history, and then vanished. This is the story of GreekFire. To understand this weapon, we must travel back half a century, to a time when the Byzantine Empire was in a state of terminal decline. The 7th century was an age of catastrophe. The empire was reeling, exhausted from a cataclysmic, decades-long war with the Sasanian Persians. And just as that war ended, the armies of Islam, unified and fervent, exploded out of Arabia. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, the richest provinces of the empire, the very heartlands of early Christianity fell one by one. The Byzantines were losing, and losing badly. They needed a miracle. That miracle arrived in the form of a man named Kallinikos. The historical records are sparse, but they paint a compelling picture. Kallinikos was a Christian architect, an engineer, or perhaps an alchemist, from Heliopolis, the ancient city of Baalbek, in modern-day Lebanon. Around the year 672 AD, as his homeland was overrun by Arab armies, he fled as a refugee. He did not come empty-handed. He traveled to Constantinople and presented himself to the emperor, Constantine IV. He brought with him a formula, a recipe for a weapon of unparalleled destructive power. Now, incendiary weapons were not new. Armies had been using fire in warfare for millennia. Simple mixtures of pitch, sulfur, and naphtha, a form of crude oil, were well known. The Romans had used fire pots, clay grenades filled with flammable liquid, and arrows wrapped in burning tow. But what Kallinikos brought was different. It was a quantum leap in military technology. His formula was not just a flammable substance, it was a complex chemical compound. And more importantly, it was not just a substance, but a complete weapon system. It wasn't meant to be thrown, it was meant to be projected. Kallinikos, being an engineer, hadn't just invented a liquid, he had invented the gun to fire it. The sources call it liquid fire or prepared fire. The name we use, GreekFire, was actually a much later term used by Western crusaders. The Byzantines themselves often called it sea fire, Roman fire, or simply the wet fire. Its composition was, from the very beginning, the most closely guarded state secret in the empire. The formula was never written down in any public manual. It was not shared with generals or admirals. According to later sources, the knowledge was entrusted to the emperor himself and to a select, hereditary guild of technicians, perhaps the descendants of Kallinikos himself, who were responsible for its manufacture and deployment. To protect this secret, the Byzantines wove a narrative of divine origin. They claimed the formula had been delivered to the first Christian emperor, Constantine the Great, by an angel. The angel had commanded that the secret must never, ever be shared with another nation. To do so would be the ultimate act of treason and blasphemy. This divine story served a dual purpose. It terrified their enemies, who believed the Byzantines wielded a holy, supernatural weapon, and it terrified the Byzantines themselves, ensuring that no ambitious general or greedy merchant would dare to sell the secret. When the Caliphate first besieged Constantinople in 674 AD, in the first Arab siege, they encountered this weapon for the first time. The results were catastrophic. The Arab fleet, which blockaded the city, was annihilated. Chroniclers describe the sea itself being set ablaze. The Muslim sailors, seeing a fire that water could not quench, were gripped by a psychological terror. They broke and fled. Kallinikos' invention had worked. It had saved the city. But the weapon's greatest test, its defining moment, was yet to come. The empire had been given a reprieve, a breathing space of 40 years. It would need every second of it. Because in 717 AD, the Arabs would return. And this time, they were not coming to raid. They were coming to conquer. They were coming to end the Roman Empire, once and for all. To face this new existential threat, the weapon of Kallinikos was perfected. It evolved from a simple device into the terrifying heart of the Byzantine navy. The weapon's effectiveness was not just in its liquid, it was in its delivery. The system was known as the siphon. Imagine a Byzantine warship, the Dromon. It is a long, narrow, and fast galley, powered by two banks of oarsmen. It is the apex predator of the Mediterranean. Built into its prow, often disguised behind a decorative, roaring bronze lion's head, is the siphon, a large bronze tube, or projector. Below decks, in a specially protected, fireproofed room, the system begins. Here, the secret liquid, the GreekFire, is stored in a large, heated bronze tank or cauldron. The liquid itself is thick, black, and resinous. The air is thick with the smell of petroleum and sulfur. Beside the tank is a complex mechanism of pumps and pipes. This was the true genius of Kallinikos' design. A force pump, likely operated by a hand bellows or a piston system, which built up immense pressure inside the sealed cauldron. This was not a simple catapult. It was, in effect, the world's first flamethrower. On the deck above, a specialized, highly trained, and extraordinarily brave crewman, the Siphonarios, stands ready. He is encased in fire-resistant, treated leather. His job is to aim the projector. When the order is given, the Siphonarios ignites the nozzle of the projector, perhaps with a simple torch. Below decks, the pumps engage. With a terrifying roar, a massive jet of pressurized, preheated liquid fire erupts from the lion's mouth. It shoots across the water, traveling 20 or 30 meters, and slams into the side of an enemy ship. The effect is instantaneous and horrifying. The liquid, being oil-based and resinous, sticks. It clings to the wooden hull, to the sails, to the rigging. It is a thick, burning jelly. The enemy sailors try to douse it with buckets of seawater, but this only makes it worse. If the liquid contains an ingredient like quicklime, the contact with water would cause a violent exothermic reaction, making the fire explode with even greater fury. The enemy ship is engulfed in moments, but the true horror is for the crew. The fire is inescapable. It clings to their clothes, to their skin. Men, wreathed in flame, leap from the decks into the sea, seeking relief. But there is no relief. The fire continues to burn on the surface of the water, a floating, fiery carpet of death. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. In an age of superstition, this was not warfare. This was witchcraft. This was the wrath of God. The Byzantine historian Theophanes, writing of the first siege, said the Arabs were seized with terror and amazement and fled in utmost confusion. This was the weapon that Emperor Leo III held in reserve. But the siphon was also a double-edged sword. It was profoundly dangerous to its own operators. The pressurized, heated, highly volatile liquid was, in essence, a bomb waiting to go off in the belly of a wooden ship. A single leak, a cracked pipe, or a lucky shot from an enemy archer could turn the dromon into its own funeral pyre. The Siphonarioi were not just soldiers. They were a special breed, working with a technology they likely did not understand, trusting their lives to the emperor's divine secret. They were the high-tech, high-risk special forces of their day. And in the summer of 717 AD, as Leo III looked out from the walls of his starving city, he knew that these men and their secret weapon were his only chance. The year 717 AD, the Umayyad commander, Maslama, is patient. He has the city completely surrounded. He knows it is starving. He believes he has already won. His massive fleet, 1,800 strong, controls the Bosphorus Strait and the Sea of Marmara. His primary task is to support the land army and, crucially, to blockade the city's sea walls, preventing any hope of reinforcement or supply. Emperor Leo III, the soldier emperor, knows he cannot survive a passive siege. He cannot wait for the Arabs to storm the walls or for his people to die of hunger. His only option is to attack, to strike first, against an enemy that outnumbers him perhaps 20-1. It is a decision that borders on madness. Leo gathers his small fleet of dromons. They are old, but they are retrofitted with the siphon. He gives the order. The small Byzantine squadron sails out of the Golden Horn, the city's protected harbor. The Arab fleet, seeing them, prepares for an easy victory. They move to encircle the tiny force, and then Leo springs his trap. We must imagine the scene. The Arab ships are wooden. Their sails are canvas. Their rigging is tarred rope. They are, in essence, floating piles of kindling. The Byzantine dromons row hard, gaining speed. They are not trying to ram. They are positioning themselves. The Siphonarioi take aim. The order is given. Pneuma, fire. From the bronze lions' mouths, The roaring jets of Greek fire erupt. The sound, a deep, thunderous hiss, is heard across the water. A thick, noxious, black smoke fills the air, smelling of brimstone. The liquid fire slams into the lead Arab ships. For a moment, there is only confusion. Then, there is fire. A fire of a kind they have never seen. It does not just burn, it explodes. It clings. It spreads. An Arab dhow, a transport ship, is hit. The jet of fire sweeps across its deck, instantly immolating the soldiers crowded there. The liquid fire pours down into the oar ports, setting the rowers ablaze. The ship's mast, coated in the sticky substance, becomes a 70-foot-tall torch. Panic. Absolute primal panic. Sailors try to beat the flames out, only to have the burning jelly stick to their hands and arms. They use buckets of water, and the fire flares up in their faces. Captains scream orders, but no one can hear. And the Byzantine ships are relentless. They are fast and maneuverable. They sweep past the burning hulks, targeting the next ships in line. A dromon pulls alongside a larger Arab warship, unleashes its siphon at point-blank range, and then rows away as the ship is consumed. The sea itself is now on fire. A slick of burning petroleum and resin spreads across the water, trapping the Arab ships in a ring of fire. Men who leap from their burning vessels fall into a sea of flames. The Umayyad fleet, the largest naval force assembled in a century, breaks. It is not a retreat, it is a rout. Ships, desperate to escape, crash into each other. Captains beach their vessels, preferring capture to the unholy fire. In a single, terrifying afternoon, Leo III has used Greek fire to shatter the Arab naval blockade. The siege is not over. The land army remains, but the tide has turned. Leo's victory on the water is total. He has broken the blockade. He can now bring supplies into the city. The winter that follows is one of the most brutal in memory. The Arab land army, now cut off from its own seaborne supplies, begins to starve. They are reduced to eating their horses, their camels, and, according to some horrifying accounts, their own dead. Plague guts their camp. When spring arrives, a new Arab fleet, sent from Egypt, arrives with supplies. Leo, his confidence soaring, sends out his dromons again. The Egyptian sailors, many of whom are Coptic Christians forced into service, defect en masse upon seeing the Byzantine ships. Having heard rumors of the sea fire, the remaining ships are captured or burned. The siege has failed. In 718 AD, almost exactly a year after they arrived, the remnants of the Umayyad army and navy retreat. Their losses are staggering. Of the 1,800 ships that arrived, perhaps only 5 make it back to Syria. Of the nearly 200,000 men who participated in the land and sea siege, fewer than 30,000 survive. It is one of the most decisive military victories in history. And it was all thanks to Greek fire. This victory did not just save Constantinople, it saved Europe. It halted the Umayyad expansion to the east, just as the Battle of Tours would halt it in the west decades later. It ensured that the Byzantine Empire would survive for another 700 years, acting as a shield for a young, fragmented, and vulnerable medieval Europe. The story is incredible, isn't it? A single piece of lost technology, a single secret, changed the entire course of our world. If you're fascinated by these forgotten battles and mysterious technologies that shaped history, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon. We dive deep into history's greatest enigmas, just like this one, every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The legend of Greek fire was sealed. It was now, without question, the most feared weapon on Earth. For the next 4 centuries, Greek fire remained the ultimate deterrent in the Byzantine arsenal. Its mere presence was often enough to win a battle before it began. Fleets from the New Rus kingdom, the Vikings of the East, sailed down the Dnieper to attack Constantinople in the 10th century. They, too, were met by the Siphones, and their fleets were incinerated. But what was this substance? The secret was kept so well that for centuries we had only terrifying descriptions of what it did. But then, in the 12th century, we get our most important source, Princess Anna Komnene. Anna was the daughter of Emperor Alexios I. She was a brilliant historian, a scholar, and a princess who lived in the heart of the imperial palace. In her famous book, the Alexiad, she gives us our best, most detailed description of the weapon and its formula. She writes, "This fire is made by the following arts. From the pine and certain other such evergreen trees, inflammable resin is collected. This is rubbed with sulfur and put into tubes, and is blown by men with violent and continuous breath. Then in this way it meets the fire on the tip and catches light and falls like a fiery whirlwind on the faces of the enemies." This is a stunning revelation. Anna is giving us the core ingredients. Let's break down the science. We are, in effect, historical detectives, and the Alexiad is our primary clue. Theory 1. The petroleum base. Anna mentions inflammable resin from pine trees. This is the adhesive. It's what makes the fire sticky, like a medieval napalm, clinging to hulls and men. But the true fuel, the heart of the weapon, was almost certainly petroleum. The Byzantines had access to natural, unrefined crude oil, or naphtha, as it was known, from wells around the Black Sea. This Median fire, as it was called, was known to be a powerful incendiary. So, component A is a base of crude oil, thickened with pine resin. Anna also mentions sulfur, which would add to the terrifying smell and the noxious, suffocating smoke. But this mixture, while highly flammable, has a problem. It doesn't explode on contact with water. In fact, it's hard to light, and it can be smothered. It doesn't match the pure terror described in the 717 siege. Anna's description, written 400 years later, might be incomplete. She might be describing a later, simpler, hand grenade version of the fire, not the high-pressure, ship-killing siphon version. This brings us to the second, more compelling theory. Theory 2. The spontaneous combustion, quicklime. This theory argues that the secret ingredient, the true genius of Kallinikos' formula, was calcium oxide, also known as quicklime or unslaked lime. The chemistry is simple, but devastating. Quicklime is a highly caustic substance. When it comes into contact with water, it undergoes a powerful exothermic reaction. It releases an immense amount of heat, instantly boiling the water and reaching temperatures well over 150 degrees Celsius, 300 Fahrenheit. Now, imagine a formula where the quicklime is mixed with the petroleum and sulfur. The siphon projects this compound. The moment the jet of liquid hits the water, or a wet ship, or even a terrified, sweating sailor, the quicklime reacts. It generates an intense burst of heat, which acts as the igniter. This would spontaneously ignite the petroleum base, causing the mixture to explode in a fiery conflagration. This theory explains everything. It explains why the fire seemed to erupt on contact with the sea. It explains why water was useless against it. Water was its fuel. It also explains why the weapon was so dangerous to store on a ship. A single leak in a damp hold could set the entire vessel ablaze. The most likely formula for the original, 7th century Greek fire, was a pressurized compound of crude oil, naphtha, pine resin, sulfur, and quicklime. A devastating, self-igniting, waterproof chemical weapon. It's also crucial to note what Greek fire was not. It was not gunpowder. Anna Komnene and other sources are very clear. They describe a jet of fire, a liquid incendiary. They do not describe an explosion, a projectile, or the concussive blast of a cannon. Gunpowder, which is a mixture of saltpeter, potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal, would not be weaponized in this way for at least another century or two, and would arrive in Europe from China. Greek fire was its own unique, terrifying branch of chemical warfare, a secret so potent the empire guarded it for over half a millennium. But secrets, no matter how well guarded, can be lost. After the 12th century, the mentions of Greek fire in the historical record become fewer. The terrifying superweapon that had saved the empire time and time again seems to fade away. By the time the Ottoman Turks, armed with massive cannons, arrived to besiege Constantinople for the final time in 1453, the Byzantines had no Greek fire left to save them. The city's defenders had to rely on cannons given to them by their Western allies. The angel's gift was gone. How? Why? The disappearance of Greek fire is a mystery as profound as its creation. There is no single answer, but rather a perfect storm of decline, disaster, and obsolescence. Reason 1. The ultimate catastrophe. The Fourth Crusade, 1204 AD. The single most devastating blow to the Byzantine Empire and to the secret of Greek fire came not from its Muslim enemies, but from its Christian allies. In 1204, the armies of the Fourth Crusade, diverted from their path to the Holy Land, turned on Constantinople. They sacked the city. This was not just a conquest, it was a 3-day orgy of destruction. The city was burned, its churches desecrated, its palaces looted. The great library of Constantinople, holding the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 years of Roman civilization, was put to the torch. The empire was shattered, broken into a collection of petty kingdoms. In this chaos, the secret of Greek fire was lost. The specialized hereditary workshops that produced the liquid were destroyed. The guild of the Siphonarioi, the family of Kallinikos, who had passed the formula down from father to son for 500 years, they were likely massacred, or they fled, their knowledge dying with them. The institutional memory, the complex supply chain of rare ingredients, the engineering know-how to build the pressurized siphons, it was all annihilated. When the Byzantines recaptured their city 50 years later, they were a shadow of their former selves. They were a small, poor, struggling kingdom. They still had fire, yes, simple incendiary pots, the lesser formula Anna Komnene likely described. But the true Greek fire, the pressurized, ship-killing siphon system of Leo III, was gone. The angel's secret had been broken, not by spies, but by allied looters. Reason 2. The dawn of a new age, obsolescence. Even if the secret had survived 1204, its time was running out. Warfare was changing. In the 13th and 14th centuries, a new secret from the East was arriving: gunpowder. The first cannons were crude, but they had one massive advantage over Greek fire: range. The siphon was a terrifying weapon, but it was a close-quarters naval weapon. A dromon had to get within 20 or 30 meters of an enemy ship to use it well within the range of enemy archers and catapults. A cannon, on the other hand, could smash a ship's hull from hundreds of meters away. Why would an empire, even a poor one, invest in a complex, colossally expensive, and suicidally dangerous close-range chemical weapon when it could forge a simple iron tube that did the job better, safer, and from a distance? Greek fire had become the medieval equivalent of a cavalry charge in World War I. It was a magnificent, terrifying relic from a bygone era. The age of liquid fire was over. The age of gunpowder and high explosives had begun. Reason 3. The loss of the source. There is a final, simpler theory. The formula relied on very specific ingredients: The most likely, the petroleum base, came from natural wells in the Caucasus region, around the Black Sea. As the Byzantine Empire shrank, it lost control of these territories. It lost access to the Black Sea coast. It's possible the empire knew the formula, but simply couldn't get the ingredients anymore. The secret wasn't lost, the supply chain was. Without its unique petroleum fuel, the formula was useless. The fire simply went out. Imitations appeared, of course. The Arabs developed their own naft, and other nations had versions of fire arrows and catapulted firepots. But none ever matched the power of the Byzantine original. None had the pressurized siphon. None could burn on water with such fury. The original, the true Greek fire, had vanished from the world. The story of Greek fire is the story of a civilization's survival. It was the nuclear deterrent of the medieval age. For half a millennium, its existence guaranteed the safety of Constantinople and held the world at bay. It was a weapon born of desperation, delivered by a refugee, and perfected by an empire on the brink. It saved the West in 717 AD, repelled the Vikings of the Ruses, and held the line against a dozen different enemies. But its legacy is one of the greatest ironies in history. The Byzantines succeeded in keeping their secret. They guarded it so closely, so jealously, wrapping it in divine mystery, that when the empire itself finally fractured, the secret died with it. It was a secret so well kept that it kept itself right into extinction. Today, nothing remains. No formulas have ever been found. No blueprints of the siphon survive. No archaeological remains of the workshops have been identified. All we have are the terrified, awestruck accounts of those who saw it in action and the what if it leaves behind. What if the formula had not been lost? What if the defenders of Constantinople in 1453 had been able to unleash the siphon against the Ottoman fleet? Would the city have survived? Would the Renaissance have taken a different course? We will never know. The fire that burned on water, the gift of the angel, the weapon that saved a civilization, is gone. It remains, forever, one of history's greatest and most profound lost secrets. But now, we want to hear from you. Of all the theories we discussed, the petroleum base, the quicklime igniter, the chaos of 1204, or the rise of gunpowder, which one do you think is the most likely reason Greek fire vanished? Was the secret truly lost, or did it just become obsolete? Let us know your strongest theory in the comments section below. We read every single one, and thank you for joining us on this journey into the past.